Good afternoon, good evening, one and all. Welcome to the Branching Factor podcast. We're trying something a little bit ambitious for the very first time. We're actually trying to record it and stream it live on the internet. This is guaranteed to go wrong somehow, but I'm in very good company. I'm Tommy Thompson, and of course, with me today is George Osborne. How are you today, sir?
Not too bad. I think this has been quite a long week. I think it's been a long week for the industry. I think it's been a long week personally. I was out at Pocket Gamer Connect, which is one of the big business conferences that takes place at the start of the year. And it's been a week where I feel I've had that devastating combination of too much coffee and not enough sleep. So I'm both cranky and tired, and yet somehow agitated and awake. It's like it's the games conference dream, and it's something that you can all look forward to when GDC comes around as well.
Oh God, that's only like 6 weeks away or something like that, now that I think about it. But yeah, we need to get onto that. And funnily enough, as you say, it has been a week. The whole pitch that we had for this episode, because it's the first time we've run the podcast since the new year, was we wanted to do, let's talk about 2024. Where's things going? How are we, particularly myself, doing a lot of stuff in and around AI in the video game sector, which is, increasingly kind of a bit of a talking point. And then George, right now, you've got your new video games industry memo over on Substack that's doing really well. You're spending a lot of time acting now as much of a commentator of the industry. So we've both got kind of interesting perspectives on this. And then, well, yeah, it has been a week. So
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it's obviously Microsoft, Activision Blizzard, I think in particular, that's sort of top of the mind in terms of this week. I mean, in the end, it was 1,900 layoffs.
Yeah.
And I mean, so obviously, let's just go into the horror of what this means for the industry. It means there's been about 5,000 layoffs since the start of 2024. If you look across last year, people were talking about last year being a bad year when you had hit essentially, five figures. We got towards the 10,000 mark and people were going, that's a bad year. And that was towards the end of 2023. So to have had so many at the beginning of this year is a real kick in the teeth. And I think the thing, and it's interesting to sort of hear what you think about this as well, Tommy, is that they are obviously, I think, still related to things that happened in the pandemic. So I look at the Microsoft and Activision Blizzard ones and go, Activision was bought at a slightly reduced price compared to its pandemic high because Bobby Kotick did terrible things to his employees and people found out about it.
Yeah.
But it was still way above what any other video games acquisition has been. And so I think there was a sense that was always going to come down, and there was always going to be this point where things like this were being restructured. But at the same time, it's hard to escape the feeling at this moment in time that what we thought we might be leaving behind in 2023 is staying with us annoyingly for quite a long time, and in a way that really is hurting people.
Yeah, like you say, game layoffs were beginning to manifest in 2023. And I think that was the thing that I was really... I struggled with it because on one hand, a lot of people are looking at this and going, this is a really horrible reality. A lot of this is coming as a reflection of the downturn that's coming from the boom of the COVID years, a huge amount of investment that came into the industry because people were stuck at home and playing video games, and suddenly all these big companies prospered. And then subsequently, the funny thing is, of course, if you actually look at that trajectory, it's still linear growth. If you plot across the last 10 years, the games industry continues to grow, but it had this weird blip, and then everybody overinvested because investors or whatever are thinking you need to do this. So this was kind of, I hate to say inevitable, but I knew there would be a shrinking of the industry at some point. But I think this, combined with the current economic climate, cost of living, increased interest rates, has made this even more extreme. And what we're seeing is it's worse than I thought it was going to be. And the horrible thing was, I thought 2023 is the start. Yeah. We're going to see this throughout 2024, probably into 2025, as it's going to take at least a fiscal year or two for all of this to begin to cool down. And also because the economic climate needs to calm down as well. So to see all that happen was very dispiriting. And then what's been really bad has been how quickly this has happened now. And like we're not, it's not even February yet. 26th of January, we're recording this here, episode 13 of the Ranching Factor podcast. And already, what is it, over 5,000 people, half of what was recorded in 2023 have lost their jobs already in 2024. Sure, the Activision, the ABK story was the big one. Again, like last year, Unity, Microsoft kind of taking up. But the Microsoft one did really take me by surprise. The scope of that, because I thought there's going to be job losses at some point as a result of the ABK acquisition, because you're bringing in existing infrastructure for a very large publisher into an existing infrastructure for a mega publisher that is considerably larger than ABK is. And so, yeah, we're going to streamline processes, particularly around, certain aspects of DevOps, certain aspects of publishing, certain aspects even of like, maybe not community, but marketing.
Yeah.
Kind of consolidate a lot of that. So I thought probably a couple of hundred jobs will get laid off, or people will get reorganized within the business. So to see them drop nearly 2,000 people, that was sobering, because we're also, as you say, Game Developers Conference, GDC is only a few weeks out. And I remember that being an undercurrent when I was at GDC last year, was like even colleagues that disclosure, I'm on the advisory board for the AI Summit. I had colleagues whose jobs were up in the air when we went to GDC. Or they lost their job right before or right after. I had friends who lost their job at GDC, sitting in a talk, and they're like, well, I've just been made redundant. So I feel like the mood at GDC this year is going to be quite grim, I feel.
Yeah, I think it was interesting being at Pocket Game Connect this week, because there was still a lot of optimism and there was still a lot of enthusiasm. I think it's remarkably natural within the games industry to be those things, because it turns out that people who make fun are often quite fun and engaging. Not
Funny
always
that.
the case. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. But I was hearing stories, of people and what they'd been through in the past year. There was someone who was laid off from a job, waited months to go and get another job, had essentially the contract in hand, and then the company that they were about to sign on the dotted line for laid off everyone in the team they were about to join, so the job offer went.
Good Lord.
I heard one person who was basically watching the layoff come to hit them, like the wave coming towards the shore. They could see their colleagues around them in other parts of the business being laid off, and they knew one by one it was their project that was being cut, right? They weren't saying it, but it was happening.
Yeah.
And this is having a real human impact. And I think, it's one of those things about the sheer quantity of them starts getting to a point where you get fatigue. You find it hard for your brain to process it. You start just seeing it as a number. And I think it's so important to make sure that we try and keep them in terms of every single person is actually still referenced. But in terms of those industry trends, and I think it's a really interesting point you were making, what happened in terms of the investment side of things, it's what I've been calling people sort of a middle finger bar chart for investment, is that there was in 2021 such a prominent spike in investment in things that were tangentially games, Web3, metaverse, all of these things, or companies whose valuations were pumped up by investors getting very, very excited. But those were investors who were outside of the industry and who saw a 20% growth in the previous year as, it's going to grow again for another year at that rate, and again and again. And it's like, no, what it's done is, the industry's tailed off in terms of its growth, but it's still well above where it was forecast to be. It's about 15%, I think, above where it was forecast to be at the time.
Yeah.
But if you've had a load of companies expand by 20%, maybe more, then there's suddenly the adjustment. But I think there's two other things to it, though, as well. One is definitely strategic and talking about a lot of these businesses. So with Microsoft, I think it's about readjusting and trying to deal with the fact that they bought three big businesses who actually had quite a lot of overlapping functions even within themselves, and hadn't really come to terms with that. Because my understanding of the relationship between Activision, Blizzard and King was that they actually had very few shared functions between them. They generally tended to operate as completely separate things in isolation. So you put them all under a Microsoft mothership. Microsoft doesn't operate like that. So there was that. And with Unity's cleaning house. Like, you look at the people who've gone, and it seems to be people who are, especially on like the ad monetization side, they're looking much more at going back to the core engine perspective of it. But frankly, it's just like, there's also just how markets work, right? January, it's a new financial year in the US. It's a good time to go and clear stuff out and get the decks fully cleared out. And then finally, and this is most annoying and brutal of all, if enough people are doing it, you can do it too. You can go further and harder than you were planning to, because everyone else has done it. And, I remember reading a piece last year where an investor who was working in the game space mentioned Musk laying off loads of people, and was like, well, Twitter doesn't seem to have had any issues. And so loads of tech companies have gone, let's go and lay loads of people off. And it's like, well, you're looking at it now and you're going, no, actually, X, as it's now called, has plenty of issues. And I think that will be one of the things as well, as we get to the end of this year and people suddenly go, there's a new console generation probably about 4 years away. Did we cut too hard? Did we cut too fast? Now do we need to think about what we're doing again? I think it's going to be an interesting ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, and of course, like you say, it's going to be an interesting ride, but at the same time, as people's livelihoods, and this is often the problem. This isn't even the first time that we're really dealing. This is the first time I think we've seen this kind of level of substantial layoffs and downsizing across the industry since probably the Xbox 360 PS3 generation, where it was basically the erosion of the AA studio. Like, we went through what I call the kind of the aftershock of Call of Duty. When Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out, every studio tried to go the triplest of AAA. Yeah. And then subsequently, the AA eroded. And I think it took until pretty much, actually, I think it really took until the success of a lot of indie studios building and becoming bigger, and a lot of work for hire studios that emerged particularly during the PS4 and Xbox One generation, that AA kind of reasserted itself. So it seemed much more concentrated in that space, I think, around that time. I know a lot of studios. In fact, when I worked I was working as a university lecturer in the Midlands, and we had like 3 studios close within the space of a year that were all within. One of them was 20 minutes walk from my old job at Derby University. But now it seems much more pervasive. We're seeing it in all these bigger companies, and a lot of them, it's the ones that have aggressively invested during the last couple of years, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Unity, whether it's, Embracer is just dropping things left and right because of their own gamble, particularly with the with Middle East investment that then fell through. And it's funny because I went on to, this is such a doom and gloom topic, but we're going to get into fun stuff in a little bit. But we can't avoid talking about this, because I'm sure, George, as well as your end, like, I have several friends who've lost their job this week, Yeah. And the thing that I'm really worried about, I talked about this on X, I guess, but also on Blue Sky, about what we're going to see is an erosion, probably one of the most seismic changes to essentially, we're going to have a skills shortage, I think, emerge as a result of all of this, because we're going to have so many people. It's going to be a talent drain, basically, that so many people are in this point where they've maybe lost their job, perhaps for the second time in the space of a year. And it's like, well, why am I bothering putting up with this? And this happens because the games industry is a very volatile space in terms of employability. A lot of people do get laid off at studios. It does happen, particularly after a big AAA launch, or people leave because of burnout. And so that we do have this thing of losing institutional and organizational knowledge. That's a thing. I think this is going to be much more seismic, and particularly at the same time, one of the things in 2024 is going to be the proliferation of generative AI. 2023 was the warm up, much like the layoffs. This is going to be the year where you're actually going to start seeing it really kick off. And we've seen it in a number of different places where whether it was like Embark Studios with the finals, they're using generative AI for the commentators. Was it the Foam Stars by Square Enix, the game that they really don't want you to compare to Splatoon, but looks like Splatoon? They're using generative AI for frivolous art that they didn't need to do it on. We're seeing it. There's been a few other instances where studios have come out and said, oh, we're exploring this or whatever else. And that happening at the same time as these layoffs is very concerning, because one of the things, it's not even a case of that. I don't think it's going to be people just losing their jobs and being replaced by AI. I don't think that's actually the bigger problem. It's going to happen a little bit. That I think we can say for certain. But I don't think that's the bigger issue, because the smarter people are going to figure out how to make it a tool in a pipeline. But what we're actually losing is you've got people who have got 20, 30 years in the business, who are people with massive amounts of institutional knowledge, of just experience. And when you're dealing with a junior who's coming into this space, you need to have that passed down, because otherwise, because sooner or later, they need to assume that leadership role. What happens if generative AI then becomes part of a production pipeline where juniors are not getting the experience they need, because now their job is to run the generative AI tool to solve this task, rather than actually getting into a lot of the meat and potatoes of game development, and not having that connection with a senior to go, oh, well, you know, back in my day when we used to do it, this is how we solved this problem. And it sounds trivial, perhaps to the outside looking in, but this is the real knowledge and value you get working in a company and in a studio like that, to learn from these people, because subsequently that is going to inform your own perspective going forward. And I worry particularly for juniors coming into this space now, if they can even get a job, whether or not they're actually going to build their skill set in a way that's going to allow them to assume those senior roles down the line. That's the thing that's scaring me at the moment.
Yeah, I think there are some really interesting things in there as well. I think one of the things this has actually made me think about is, I know broadly the number of people laid off. I actually don't know much about the precise profile of them. There hasn't been, to my knowledge, as someone who hopefully watches the industry quite closely, analysis of the kinds of people who've been laid off, the way the roles have shaken out. Look, I'm aware it's been pretty painful for lots of people in lots of different contexts at lots of seniority, and it's pretty widespread. But even within that, there will be trends. There will be a sense of, is it more seniors going because their salary cost is pretty top heavy if you factor in, you know, cost of living and everything increases going up? Is it juniors being sacrificed on the altar to be, you know, save costs and essentially go, we may have things like generative AI being used within the pipeline, which we're crossing our fingers and hoping that juniors can be replaced. It's something that actually I'm not entirely sure about. So I'd be really interested, first of all, to see that. But the other things that you're talking about as well, that there's two things that I've really noticed, I think, especially in the past couple of weeks, that I think is happening as a result of this. First thing is that, and you know, I'm saying this as someone who is consulting at the moment, so maybe I'm just trying to butter my own bread, but it does feel like it's boom time for consultants, because the thing is that expertise that you're talking about, businesses still need. They can't afford it in a full salary cost, and they probably can't afford it in a full agency cost. But if you are a solo consultant or you're a small consultancy and you charge a reasonable-ish fee in comparison to that, they will go, for the equivalent of a junior mid-ranking employee, I can get the expertise that I now need. And so people are starting to plug in there. So it's like consultants, external development, that kind of expertise is sitting there. The other thing is, for my newsletter every week, I do sections about available jobs, people on the move, and then every month I also now do like a job seeker special to highlight people on the move. The thing that was really interesting in terms of the jobs this week were that there were plenty of video games jobs outside of games. So you had the BBC hiring for a global director for their licensing. You had DeepMind hiring game systems engineers. You had the Premier League hiring an associate producer to work on the fantasy football, but also other games that they're preparing. I think it's one of those things where the industry, one of the things that might be happening here is that talent is actually going to go out and sort of sit in this kind of supporting ring. And one of two things either happens. It's either the industry suffers as a result of this because that talent ends up in those places instead and grows those things in a way that is possibly less to the industry's interest and more to the interest of those companies. or it could be one of those things where it could lead to kind of like a useful extension of the industry's boundaries, where talent starts moving out into those safer havens where, you've got more security in, say, a place like the Premier League, weirdly, which you shouldn't be the case. But, you've got kind of that more security within that kind of place and can grow a sort of a different kind of games experience, games expertise. I'm very interested to see how that goes. And my hope is that is one of the things that helps to essentially keep people within the industry universe, because exactly as you say, like back in the day, I think a lot of people know that I was at UKI, the Video Games Industry Trade Association in the UK, and we did a big industry census, and one of the things that was always coming out every time we did it was senior talent leaves. You get to your mid-30s and the drop off compared to games is much bigger than other industries, because it's less secure, it's less well paid. If you're getting to that point of going, I want to get a mortgage, I want to look after my family. I saw someone post last week saying, I've been in games for 20 years, I've been laid off 4 times. It's like, yeah, if I've got a mortgage, which I currently do, and I'm going, I really need a secure job because that's what's going to make me feel most comfortable. Take your games skills, take the things that you've got in terms of whether you're a PR person or whether you're working from a coding background, and just apply it somewhere else. That's what a lot of people will be thinking, and that's the potential risk here.
Like particularly but among engineers, that's always been a recurring thing, because even though the bulk of the time, like a programmer tends to get paid more than an artist, an animator, producer, etc. in a game studio, they're still getting paid a fraction of what they could be paid if they were elsewhere. It's like, oh, well, I really enjoy making games, but I can make twice the money if I go and write apps for a mobile, for an investment bank, I have literally done this. I have worked in the investment banking sector. It paid all right. Horrible people, but the money was good. And then games, the people are great. The money is terrible. But funnily enough, what you're saying is, like, both of us are in that capacity of consulting. And I'm also very conscious of this. This is actually becoming, I think, particularly given the current environment, one of the things that I am very conscious of, because I'm an AI consultant. It's sort of, all right, I've got to really cement my credentials. And I didn't rapidly go and change my LinkedIn bio in the last 6 months. Sort of, we were talking about this before we went on air, but like, I've been in this space for a decade. I know a thing or two about a thing or two. And so, funnily enough, I literally had this conversation with a client recently, because we're talking about, hey, they're interested in, could we actually use a few tools to try and optimize our production, whether it's generative AI, whether it's other types of AI in general. And we were having this conversation. I said, look, I'm happy to talk to the rest of the studio to try and allay fears, because one of my concerns is that people will see me coming in like, oh, I'm here to visit the studio for a couple of days. And it's like, he's basically going to start figuring out which of us are getting, the chop and and here's a tool that's going to replace you, which is absolutely not my intent. My intent is to find tools that are going to help expedite your workflow and help solve production problems. But I totally understand people are going to see that when they're talking, when they're seeing me just going, who is this guy? It's going to be, I think, like you say, it's going to be an interesting year to watch. I'm trying to do more, doing kind of industry commentary over on this channel. Actually, if you're watching this on YouTube on AI and Games Plus about generative AI stuff, I'm going to keep trying to do more of this, because I think it is really important to give context. And it is sort of kind of what you and I are both trying to do, is trying to give industry context, trying to make sure that people understand what's actually happening, and the pluses and minuses that emerge as a result of this. I think right now it's very much in the minus. But I guess coming back to Pocket Gamers Connect, because I would have loved to have went, but bad timing for me personally. Like, so what else was what was happening? Because I've only ever been to like PGC once, if I remember right, like many moons ago.
PGC's it's a really interesting event, because so it takes place about 3 weeks into the year. So it's the time where everyone goes for their first business meetings of the year. It's their first time to practice their pitch. And it has this mixture of, on the one hand, it is trying to be like a mobile games event, because that's Pocket Gamers' background, and to be fair to them, consumer business side, they've been there. literally pretty much longer than anyone else, and as long as anyone else. The conference was 10 years old this year, which they were making a big celebration of. But one of the big things that I was picking out from this year, just in general, and it's something that's been going on for the last few years, has just been the blurring of the boundaries. The divisions between platforms are feeling, I think, increasingly arbitrary to both players and the market. There are some times where there's a legitimate reason for a platform boundary. Anything that's created as a VR first experience. It's a very obvious technical reason why that's the case. But if you're talking about a consumer market now where people are used to, you've got Spotify, you walk over to your laptop, you start playing it there, it's playing there off your laptop, you get in because you've had your laptop with you and you've had your headphones plugged in, and you go over and switch on a smart speaker and it carries on and picks up where it left off. That is the expectation for consuming music. It's the expectation in terms of the way people consume film, TV, all of those things. Games has entered this space where, for probably the first time, it really feels behind what other creative mediums are doing to the average person who is playing. And unless and again, people will go, well, let's just use Fortnite as an example, because we'll probably come back to that to talk about what's going on with app stores. But, Fortnite was available on mobile devices. Was it the device of choice for most people? No. But was there a generation of younger players and a generation of players in other markets, especially in Asia, who were willing to just go with mobile first and happy to make it work for them? Yeah. And you could unite them into a cross-platform experience. So I think one of the things that's in general is happening is what's going on with all of the blurring of these boundaries. And then how is that being accelerated as well by things like Roblox, right? Where Roblox is just platform agnostic. It is just everywhere. It's available and accessible. You can create and become part of that economy. It's not just the boundaries between platforms that are blurring, it's the boundary between the player and the developer. Like, that entire relationship is going. So that was one thing. And then I sort of referenced the EU. The other thing that just really stood out was, normally I'm one of the weirdos talking about politics and policy at a video games event. People are like, George, what are you doing? We don't want to talk about this
again.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example was 2018 GDPR, and people going, what is GDPR? And it's like, you've got 4 days to comply, and people going, do you think I should probably phone my lawyer about this? Yes, you should phone your lawyer about this. If we look at where we are in terms of what happened this week, the thing that I noticed was just grassroots developers talking about it, and talking about it plain, absolutely something that's essential for them. And I think it's because tech policy has become like the contested space in terms of what's going on politically. So, loads of people at that conference do have mobile interest. So therefore, the fact that essentially the EU's put in place something called the Digital Markets Act, which is pretty much forcing the App Store open. There's a whole load of conversation at the moment about how Apple's doing that, and the way Apple is trying to stop people from doing it by basically sort of charging them exorbitant fees for doing so, in a way that's funnily similar to the Unity runtime fees. But there's a whole load of conversation about, is this about to break? Is this going to give us a load of opportunity? And then online safety, right? Digital Service Act, that's coming into force later this year in the EU, and the Online Safety Act is coming into force in September in the UK. And those come with punchy fines, 10% of global turnover kind of fines for failing to protect users under their responsibilities. And in the UK case, failing to discharge your responsibilities properly, especially in regards to the regulator asking you to make changes, you are going to have to send someone up to go to prison, right? It's called senior management liability. So if you've got user-to-user communications in your games, you have to know this stuff. And I think one of the things that was really noticeable was so many people talking about it. I think it's the time that the games industry has realized it's both big enough and significant enough that politics is at its door, and you have to know it, you have to adapt to it. And I think increasingly people are going, well, we have to get our voices heard, because if we don't, it's just going to be stuff that's designed for big tech, right?
Speaking of voices being heard, the audience is saying that your microphone is a little quieter than mine.
A little quiet. There we go. Is that better?
I think so.
Sure.
I felt it.
Sure.
But we'll let them dictate that in a second.
Let it percolate.
But funnily enough, talking about this, we've also got, on top of all this, the ongoing, well, we've talked about this over on the VGIM, was the generative AI the legal situation around AI as a whole, and particularly generative AI is proving to be quite an issue. Happy Pie says, sorry, it's still very low, so if there's any boosting you can do on your device, that might help, but I'm going to talk for a minute anyway. So yeah, we've currently got the situation, and I've talked about this a lot over in AI and Games Plus, in the sense that we are dealing with a lot of generative AI technologies are being pushed onto the sector at a time when legislation has not really caught up with it. And the knock-on effect of that, or the problem with that, is that there's a lot of legal ambiguity around whether or not you can use certain technologies. And so my last video that I put out, we were talking about Steam's updated policies, because they're trying to make it clearer as to whether or not you can use certain tech in your game when you try and launch it, and then trying to break it down in more detail as to what types of technologies, how are they being adopted in your game, what are the issues that you have to be considering. And I think they're trying to make this a little clearer, but even then they're not particularly clear on the guidelines, because the technology is changing so rapidly, and also there isn't really any legislation that's been formalized in the US, in the EU. You know, the UK, as much as they want to argue that they're going to do whatever, they're pretty much just going to play ball with what the EU says, because otherwise they're not really, it's almost as if leaving the European Union has left us with a bit of a headache in how we actually assert our independence. But a problem, that's a political discussion for another time. But certainly at this point, with a lot of the companies, like, if you look at things like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, like OpenAI in general, Microsoft, are all currently in legal battles. We've got the US Congress now saying that actually we think you should be paying anybody that we think that anyone whose data you may have procured as part of your generative AI training data, well, you're going to have to go and pay them. And then companies coming out and saying, well, actually, if we do this, we'll bankrupt us, because it's no way it's possible for us to pay for all of the assets that we're using. Like, well, should you exist? But it's causing, and I think this is a real problem, because I think a lot of companies are applying generative AI in very limited quantities, waiting to see the blowback, both in terms of whether or not it suffers legal ramifications, but also what's the user response to it. Because also in general, the user response has been, it's I've not really heard many examples where people have spoken highly about the adoption of generative AI in a particular project. I was chatting with someone recently, because we were playing a lot of the finals, which came out in December, I think. I think that was when it finally came out of beta or whatever, and it's now like the full season's running. Like you say, they use generative AI for the voices of the commentators. The voices are abysmal. Like, I remember the first time I heard them, I thought, this game's in beta. It's their first season, so it's probably still rough around the edges. They'll probably replace those voice actors because they probably threw it in at the last minute. And then a week later, I read it was a generative AI system. It's like, oh, good. Now I don't feel bad, because those voice lines are really bad.
Yeah. I think you're completely right in terms of the attempt to try and work out what the pushback is going to be. Can you sneak forwards with certain bits and pieces without people kicking back too much? And if you can do that, well, if you can take, that first yard, you can take the second, and then suddenly, you'll try and grab a few more yards, and then suddenly it's away you go, and you've taken the whole lot. But I think the challenges you've articulated around it are exactly why developers are going to find it difficult to do so. And going back to talking about Pocket Gamer, I spoke on a panel which was about, will 2024 be the rebirth, a renaissance for the games industry? I mean, entertainingly, everyone said, no, don't be silly. It's more like a reconfiguration or a restructuring. But generative AI came up and people said, well, you probably won't see any decent application of it until well into the year, if not into next year.
Yeah.
On the basis that, one, it is difficult to do well in terms of adding it to the pipeline, something that you've said to me before. Two, it gives too much user blowback. And three, the legal situation around it is such a nightmare. And this is one of the times where actually a lot of very powerful lobbying forces with a lot of money stand to lose something. In recent years, it's very often been big tech who've had all the cash, are pushing something forwards, and no one can stop them because they've got so much money. You're looking at this, and it's like worlds of entertainment, and these things have, first of all, very well paid lobbyists in your very biggest entertainment companies. You also have soft power, enormous soft power, and the idea of human creativity and the intellectual properties and everything that have been created that people have fallen in love with somehow being threatened. It's the kind of story that gets people who are thinking about law policy animated and aggressive against you. And so what that means is that, you're using a generative tool and you're not entirely sure where it's coming from. Like, you said this to me, like when I interviewed you for VGym, it's just like, good luck, lads. You are taking your life into your own hands on this one. And yes, Steam may be sort of weakening in terms of its position on it. But I tell you something, Steam is a very bad way of thinking about what your risk is, because Steam is far too open.
Yeah.
And if anything, one of the things to keep an eye on probably for the next few years is people within policy worlds going, hang on, why have we just let this pretty libertarian platform exist without meaningfully regulating it when it accounts for a major portion of one of the biggest entertainment sectors in the world that happens to also be intermeshed in our technologies and lives? Steam's ability to kind of go under the radar is fading. And so in this generative AI context as well, what it chooses or doesn't choose to do, it might be like the backstop in terms of what you can get away with, but it's certainly not in terms of risk. So yeah, I think there will be people using it and there will be people trying to grab a bit of ground, but anything substantial from any big business is going to be slow and steady or else, right?
Yeah, like we're still trying to figure out, like, that's the thing. And I think this is, so I talked about it with yourself, but also when I was interviewed about it for the BBC, which also you had a hand in making happen, was one of the things I was talking about is a lot of the stuff that people see, particularly with generative AI. It's, oh, wow, cool, it can make a 3D model. Oh, wow, cool, it can make a texture. Oh, wow, it can write a bit of dialogue. And it's like, right, that's cool in and of itself. Is it practical and is it useful? And I'm a cynic because most of the time I'd say no. Looking at it, like, funnily enough, I don't use GPT on a day-to-day basis. I have used GPT in a handful of cases, and it's almost, I think all of these tools have exactly the same thing. They're so mediocre in the quality of the output that they present. And that isn't to say that, you look at other AI generated images, oh, they're pretty. It's like, yeah, they're pretty, but they're actually quite formulaic and they conform to very particular styles and standards. Whereas I need something that's bespoke, that suits my needs. And I need to be able to rip it apart and tear it apart and play with it in order to sort the thing I want. So talking about GPT, for example, I actually talked about this with my partner, and I said, one of the best things about GPT is it writes the text that no one wants to write and very few people want to read.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Because actually my partner was like, I have an end of year performance review thing I need to write. And I'm like, get GPT to write it for you. But no, that sounds like a terrible idea. I was like, have a look. You actually did try it. Oh, actually, I can steal bits of this. And I've done this for pitches and a few other bits and pieces where it's like, oh, please write a paragraph on this. And I'm like, oh, right. GPT does the first draft. Oh, this is crap, but this is enough of a spine that I can then rip it apart and put it together. So we haven't figured out how it's really going to fit in the production pipeline yet. And even looking, so, we've got AI Summit at GDC coming up. We've got a couple of generative talks coming in, and most of it is still like, we're trying to figure out how it can work in this context. Yep. None of it, and I said this when I was interviewed at the BBC, you're not going to see games that use this aggressively and pervasively for at least another year or more. Yeah. Foam Stars is doing it for like collectible albums that are like side trinkets that you collect in the game or whatever. This is them testing the waters, as you so said. Oh, what if we can create these little art assets that we can put in? What's the blowback from the audience? Does this put us in any sort of legal hot water? Do we end up having a regulator or someone start pestering us? Because at that point, it's like, oh, right, this is a quick thing to fix, right? It's a handful of textures that you can quickly swap out. It's not like half the game ends up having to get redone. So this is, it's kind of, um, it's a very minor issue. And actually, that was the thing that annoyed me about that story when I read about it, because it's album covers, collectible album covers, which is meant to be part of the aesthetic and style of the game. And I thought, that's the sort of thing an artist loves to do.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like a fun thing. I mean, I'm not an artist. I mean, I can draw, but, you know, that's about it.
Yeah.
But I thought, I have friends who, back when I launched Sure Footing on Steam and Xbox years ago, I hired my friends to do achievement art. I could have, you know, nowadays, I could just get Dali or whatever to do it. But at the time, I thought, oh, that's such a fun thing. And I went out and spoke to one of my friends and I said, would you be interested in doing this? And they said, oh, wow, this sounds like so much fun. So I gave them all the achievement information, and they went off and made me a bunch of little achievement icons. And they're great, and I love them. And it's like, I understand what you're trying to do, but also it pissed me off so much that that's how you decided to try and employ it, because it sounded like something that was actually fun and creative versus the ghostwriter tech that Ubisoft have announced, which is incidental dialogue generation, which that sounds more like, give me a tool that deals with something I don't want to have to figure out. So proper lines of dialogue that actually influence story. My narrative designer is going to have control of that. But can you give me 8 different ways an NPC can apologize for bumping into you? So, right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The first 2, oh, sorry. Oh, excuse me. And then you're like, oh, shit. Now what? So having a tool
Google
do that.
synonyms, right?
Right.
Yeah. But
exactly.
This is the thing, is that in terms of, I mean, I don't use GPT at all, because why would I take away the one thing that I've got over it, which is my style, my insight, the stuff it doesn't know? I know loads of gossip that GPT doesn't know. I can talk to people off the record about stuff. They get on the phone to me, they explain stuff to me. Never going to learn it, because it's never going to be online anywhere, because that is an off-the-record conversation. So if I suddenly start going, right, I want to churn my newsletters out by getting GPT to write a load of stuff, I make my writing boring, I make it generic, I make it pointless. Where I've used things that do have sort of an AI functionality within them, it's been to unlock creativity, to turn me from being, you know, that person who's grinding on a dull task because it has to be done, into someone who can spend more time editing and thinking about things. So the simplest thing is just Zoom cloud transcription, right, of calls.
Right.
Where, right, you know, and this is the thing, those transcriptions aren't perfect. You know, you do have to go and check some things from time to time. You have to go and sort out the punctuation, this, that, and the other. But what happens is you get at the end of the call, and then 5 minutes later, you've basically got the transcript in front of you. So then your job switches from being, I need to spend 60 minutes, maybe a couple of hours, depending upon how long it is, typing, writing, pausing, doing all of that stuff just to get to the point, you know, and knackering yourself out in the process. You can just jump ahead to what you do as a writer. What you do as an editor is look, find the interesting things, build the story, because you've saved 2 hours on the churning out the transcription so that you can edit. And I think so much of the talk around AI and generative AI, and this is me speaking not as an expert, you are obviously completely the expert, and your viewers almost certainly are some of the experts too. But my sense around it is so much of the conversation is about perceived risks and perceived doom and gloom about it, that people aren't actually just going and sitting and thinking, what is actually the constructive, realistic way this is going to be used, and how can you generate that upside yourself? Since, you know, I've started using the Zoom transcription function, I've started doing a lot more interviews for my newsletter, and I'm producing more interesting content because I can just focus on finding really good people, spending time researching really good questions, finding the interesting stuff they say, and going much more into the detail. And it's like, too often it seems to be about just like someone thinking, what can I do in a race to the bottom? You know, how can I, or even just, how can I make work easy? And the idea is, for me, is almost like work is never easy, right? Whatever you're doing, it's hard. Can you get rid of some tedious elements of it? Yes, but you're going to find the work hard somewhere else instead as a result of it. It's just that question of, can you get to the more valuable stuff using it? And that feels to me more of the direction it needs to go in. But at this moment in time, like you say, well-intentioned efforts, and then suddenly they take away one of the actual great outlets for creativity, that if you offer it and you go, I mean, let's say the album art, right? You know what you do instead? You don't get generative AI to do it. You go and commission a load of famous album artists, right, to go and do one each. And it costs you a bit of cash, costs you a bit of wedge, and yet you can turn them all into unlockables that people genuinely want, into merchandise that people want to get, into art that you can then go and monetize. Whereas with the generative stuff, people are just going,
like, even the optics of that, the optics of, we use generative AI to do this versus we hired the album art, the artist of, like, this person who's done this album and this album and this album, and we hired these people to make album covers. We're going to release it as a, like you say, we could also release it as a book or something like that. Yeah. But just the optics on that alone just sounds awesome. Like, if they'd announced, oh, we went and got these famous people to come and do this, and sure, maybe they paid them a wee bit of money or whatever, but like, that is actually more appealing.
Yeah,
I think. I think because it shows an investment in the brand and in the product, that they're committed to the product. They're like, we're willing to spend extra money to elevate this like one step further, versus what this sounds more like is, we tried to cut a corner somewhere. And this is Square Enix of all people, you know, they got the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And we tried to cut a corner somewhere in an effort to allow us just to cut a load more corners in ways that kind of go against what we should be doing, which is being creative, right? Like, that's what people are in this thing for. And that's, again, it's not to say don't use technologies like this in interesting ways, or don't think about ways that you could use it. I mean, you talked to me about the Mass Effect example, you know, upscaling the textures in terms of the remaster trilogy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you know what? That's really, really smart. That's a really sensible way to go and use a machine learning technology. Like, as I understand it, again, this is me being a dum-dum here, but looking at that and going, these are historic games that people want to still play, and bringing it back to life at considerably less expense, so you as a business can make money, people can play it, and you can put that back into doing more of that. Great. I think literally everyone is on board with that, because why not, right? And then it frees up designers, developers, everyone who, instead of going, you're now going to get locked into the next 2 years in just upscaling a load of assets, it's now instead, cool, you can focus entirely on new stuff, creative stuff, interesting stuff, because we've got that covered.
You played the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, I think, before I told you about that as well.
Yeah, completely. It blew my mind when you told me that, like, genuinely. And I think that's, you know, just been sort of one of the consistent things about this, is just, once again, the problem here is not the technology. It's not even the industry. It's the gold rush. It is the people it's the prospectors who are just running in, who've dropped all of the Web3 stuff from their handles and are now positioning themselves as AI consultants, much to your chagrin. But they're running into this space, and what they're doing is they're first of all chatting absolute nonsense. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know their expertise, and they don't know that the industry has been doing so much of this foundational work already. And I think that's the bit where it gets really damaging, because credible use of AI within technology starts to get lumped in with people who are just going, you can make a game using this, you just have to go and ask it to do it, and it comes out with a great video game. It's like, no, it doesn't. You know it doesn't. It comes out with nonsense. It comes out with rubbish that people won't want to play. So yeah, I mean, this is, again, me just venturing non-expert opinions, but I think there is that sense of people forgetting that what it should be doing is basically targeted towards unlocking as much human creativity as possible, not taking it away.
That reminds me, I'm going to, at some point, we need to do a video on this, or I'm going to do a video on this, because I know we talked about the Mass Effect one. One of my favorite AI applications of the last 12 months is in God of War Ragnarok, because they do the technology for upscaling in real time in the game. And it's sort of like DLSS, which is what the NVIDIA graphics cards run nowadays. And the reason they did that was to cut install sizes on your PS5. because otherwise it would just be you wouldn't be able to. I think they said that they managed to cut like the install size of God of War Ragnarok by like a third or 25% or something like that through this approach. And I think that's amazing. That's a really useful and interesting application that actually only really benefits the end user, because they're like, all right, well, I need to uninstall Call of Duty now because I want to go and play God of War Ragnarok. But that's a story for another time. Just noticing in the chat there, Happy Pie says, I use GPT more as a manual or knowledge hub for things that I want to learn, mostly programming, more efficient than Googling, which has ironically become even worse as of late because of AI spam. So using it to learn or look things up, pretty much. And I think it kind of speaks to, I think, really what you were saying a minute ago, that one of the big issues that we have is like, wind the clock back 18 months. Everyone's talking about Web3 and NFTs. Now, Web3 and NFTs, I'm not an expert in that field, but from the outside looking in, it strikes me as fucking useless in the context of the games industry. And I know people who worked in blockchain for a very long time, but it doesn't matter how many times you try and polish this turd, I'm still pretty confident it's a turd. I think the big difference between that and generative AI is that we're having the same hype, the same prospectors coming into the space making an awful lot of noise, and like you say, there's race to the bottom, but actually there is some good stuff that can come out of this. And I think that is the big difference, because at least the last time when Square Enix or Ubisoft were like, we're going to make NFTs, it went down like a lead balloon. Whereas there is this kind of space of some of the stuff that gets announced and you go, oh, what the heck is this crap? And then on the other end, there is all this other interesting work that's happening where you think, that is cool, that is useful, I'd love to see where that goes. But also, I think looking at, for example, the finals voice actors, I don't think a lot of it is ready yet. And one of the things I get really annoyed about is winding the clock back to my academic days, and particularly my early research career. Researchers often are the inventors of elaborate hammers. And what they do is they create the best hammer in the world, but it can only hammer 3 types of nails. And so, but they don't know what those nails are when they make the hammer. And so what happens is they build this really cool hammer, and then they spend an awful lot of their time running around trying to find a nail to hit with, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where we are right now. We had this a little bit with deep learning, and now we're seeing it again with generative AI. We've got this really cool technology. It's not quite there yet, but everyone's running around with their really awesome AI hammer trying to find something to hit. And so, we went through this with deep learning where everyone tries to apply a deep learning algorithm to solve every problem in the world. And then we go, actually, might be better off just using an existing approach or technique because it doesn't fit that type of problem. And there's going to be situations where that happens. I feel like the same thing's happening with generative AI, is everyone wants to try and hit everything with the generative AI hammer. And it's going to take us a little while to really learn from it. Much in the same way that, as we talked about on the VGIM a while ago, like the silent revolution of deep learning in video games was something that took a while to kick off, because there was a lot of conversation prior to that never really... I was in meetings with game developers 15 years ago about how to use machine learning, and they're going, nah, that's not going to work. That's not going to fit how we do things. It's not going to fit our production pipeline or processes. And now, very different story. So I feel like there is actually some useful work that's going to happen. But it's going to take time. And I think we're going to go through a very ugly 12 months to 18 months, I think, with this, as more and more, like we said, they're going to test the waters a little bit more. The legal situation is going to evolve, and then I think in time it's going to cool off. But I think it's going to foster a lot of mistrust and a lot of resentment, or even just anger, I think, within the industry. Like, I've already had this, not anger, but I distinctly remember a conversation I had at GDC last year where I was chatting with someone who, I won't name names, but they worked for a big AAA studio, and we were meeting for the first time, and someone introduced me as an AI consultant, and they gave me a look. They went, AI or like game AI? And I said, I do both, but I prefer game AI. And they were like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
And it's sort of it's like the Scottish people on actually the equivalent of this is Scottish people on holiday.
Yeah.
Which is English, and they're giving you that look, and you go Scottish, and they go, hey. Sorry,
and away you go.
Sorry.
No. It's a funny thing because as he was saying this, it was kind of going again back to what we discussed when we were having an interview, but also a conversation I was having yesterday, funnily enough, with someone who works at an organization, which is about trying to hook up academics with people in the games industry to try and turn what they're doing in terms of their research into practical, interesting applications within interactive entertainment.
I'll need to ask you later who that was.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's interesting stuff, right? But one of the things that you said to me, in terms of the way people are thinking about pipelines is end product. You need to get to the end product because you've got this much cash to make this project in this period of time, or else everyone, as we've seen, loses their job, right? So what does that mean? You have this weird mixture in which, on the one hand, you have people who are creative, who are thinking about how do you create a really fun and engaging game. Those people then are therefore quite naturally in favor of innovative things. Let's try this new technology or this new approach because it's quite cool. But then they've got the conservatism of someone building a bridge. This has got to not collapse, right? This has got to work. And so therefore you have this sense where it's like creative, but in remarkably narrow boundaries in a sense, is that you're very able to be creative. But again, these people may well not see how a technology could actually be applied in a way that could really help them because they're thinking 12 months, 24 months, 6 months, maybe even, and going, this thing needs to work. This can't go wrong. And so therefore you won't try it. And so you do have that challenge. And what you do need is, frankly, you need some belligerent idiots who are going to fundraise a load of cash, who are going to somehow get a load of money somewhere because they sell a game in early access and it's, definitely fine. People like that to go and step on the rakes, blow themselves up on the landmines, or in very rare cases, scamper through the minefield completely unscathed because it turns out that the magic shoes they invented, let's go on this tool metaphor that you started on it, actually the magic shoes were perfect. It was the perfect solution, and everyone else is going, bloody hell, I need to get my magic shoes, right? And then off they go. But I think there's that's the challenge. It's the challenge of all new technologies. It's the challenge of all revolutions, which is to what extent do you go in on it and how much do you miss by not? And I think you've mentioned it as well. That's really interesting about this is didn't go in on Web3. Well, unless you were talking about Bitcoin and being there for the very early days and then suddenly being stonkingly rich because people were paying silly money for it, almost everyone else wiped out by it. Games industry, in a large part this year and last year, has been wiped out by it because stupid people said that video games and NFTs and Web3 was all the same thing. And suddenly when the money dries out, lots of impact through the market. But generative AI and AI in general, I mean, it's demonstrated its use case. It's demonstrated, broadly speaking, where it can fit in. This element of the technology might not have the full answers yet, but someone's going to arrive at them at some point. And I think that's the difference here is just how can you stop the really shady idiots from ruining it for everyone else? But also how can you make sure that if anyone does get ahead, they don't get too far ahead? Because, I mean, that's the other big thing as well, is just who's got the size and scale to have enormous data sets that they have access to, that they have enough money to run big LLMs or whatever to go and do this kind of work. Well, it's the kind of people who've dominated the economy for the last decade, for better, for worse, for society, technology, and politics. So it's bloody complicated. And to my mind, the easiest way for you to kind of get through it is wait and see for another few months. Keep your eye out, keep your finger on the pulse,
but don't. Yeah, it's
don't bet the farm.
Yeah. People are still saying we're going to look to see if we can boost your audio. I think the next time we do this.
God damn it!
Because
it's literally here. I mean, it's just like I don't know how much louder this could be. It's
funnily enough, even on my end, you're actually not as loud as you could be. Funnily enough, when I'm looking at it, but I haven't figured out. Well, We'll get there. We'll get there.
Hey, who knows?
I like it. You're enjoying this because now you look like a football pundit. So
I very much do. I do feel a lot like John Watson here. So I mean, but anyway, what I'm going to try and do, I'm going to obviously just try and diddle around with these controls one final time. But what else were we going to be talking about, Tommy? Because I think there was some more stuff.
We were going to think about some more fun things. Let's see. People asking if you set the correct mic in. Happy Pie says. Happy Pie says, kind of reminds me of procedural generation in games where there has been developers thinking, oh, this is an amazing tool, let's use it, and then think they'll have a nuanced, varied, and high quality world generation tool in 6 months. I feel like on that note, I feel like the 1,000 bowls of oatmeal problem has came back again with generative AI. I remember giving a talk about this years ago, about the backlash, or not so much the backlash, but the reaction to No Man's Sky. And I was sort of explaining that you've got the 1,000 bowls of oatmeal problem conflated with the, or compounded rather, by the Star Wars archetype problem. Or every science fiction universe has the same problem of every planet is just one biome. Here's the snow planet. Here's another snow planet. Here's the desert planet. Here's the other. Like, remember when The Force Awakens came out and everyone went, hang on, are they going back to Tatooine? And it wasn't. Was it?
It was Jakku.
Jakku. I couldn't remember. I haven't watched The Force Awakens. And
don't feel bad about it.
No. The only one of them I've rewatched, actually, there's two of them that I've watched in recent memory. I rewatched Rogue One and I rewatched The Last Jedi, because I like both of those films. I'm a Last Jedi. I'm not going to defend it entirely. There are problems, but I think The Last Jedi is by far the most interesting of those three movies. I have never watched The Rise of Skywalker since I saw it in the cinema. It's an
absolute disaster. Terrible film.
That's the first time I came out of a Star Wars movie and I was angry. And this is despite the fact I went to a midnight screening of Attack of the Clones where they got the reels mixed up.
Wow. Okay.
I'll tell you.
We'll talk about this later. Yeah.
But yeah, they mixed the reels up, and I lost 30 minutes of the movie, and I still enjoyed it more than The Rise of Skywalker.
I know, and I mean, Attack of the Clones was also pretty dire.
Attack of the Clones is the worst of the prequels. I also think it's a toss up. I think between Rise of Skywalker and Attack of the Clones is the worst Star Wars movie ever made. Don't know. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about, let's try and end on a little bit of a fun note, because we do like games. We do enjoy games. We even play games sometimes. Let's have a look at the release schedule. What's coming out this year that we're actually excited about playing?
That's one of the other things as well. Like people, I'm afraid, sorry to go back to the kind of doom and gloom side of things, is that coming into 2024,
you're increasingly like this as you're doing the doom and gloom.
I'm just doing this. Yeah, it's just hello. Going into 2024, I did a piece for VGym where I was just like, look at the year ahead, look at what's coming down the pipe. And it was like, whoa, it's pretty quiet at the moment. And it is starting to get busier. I think the Xbox, the Developer Direct, helped out quite a bit because that chucked in Indie, it chucked in Avowed. It seemed to suddenly make things a bit noisier. And everyone is basically waiting for, when is Nintendo going to do the thing?
Right. Okay.
We know
let's quickly do that. Let's quickly do that because my assumption, or I'm thinking they're going to do what they've done before.
Yeah.
They'll finally admit its existence in the spring. We'll have a direct in the summer that tells us a little bit more about it. When I say the thing, I'm talking about the next console. And if they're going to do it this year, they announce in the spring, direct in the summer, release September.
Yeah,
it's a fall release. It becomes the number one Christmas item. To me, that's the Nintendo template. They've done that before. I wouldn't be surprised if they do it again. And also, unlike the other platform providers, they never announce the new console until they're confirmed they have a launch date for it. Because everyone was saying, "Oh, last Christmas. Oh, they're going to announce it in the winter." I'm like, no, they're not, because this is the last winter, and they're riding on Pikmin 4. They're riding on Tears of the Kingdom. They're riding on Super Mario Brothers Wonder to sell more copies, to sell more consoles, because they're going to get as many of them as they can, and then now we're going to announce the new one, because that's what they do. What do you think? Do you think it's 2024? 24? Sorry.
I think it is this year. I think the clues are, why is the Switch release calendar so quiet? Or why is it full of things like 1,000 Year Door Hey, look, Thousand Year Door remake, great. Mario versus Donkey Kong remake, great. A Princess Peach thing where she changes outfits, love it. The style's fantastic, but there is very clearly the space where something like Metroid Prime 4 should be, and it isn't. So, release schedule number one. Number two is how many people have been talking about the fact they were showing this off at Gamescom last year. So they were showing off apparently a version of the Switch 2, which is what it's strongly rumored to be.
What I'd heard, yeah.
At Gamescom. And the thing about it is that it's not we're reinventing the wheel. We're not doing the kind of classic Nintendo jump from console generation of wild success, massive flop, wild success, massive flop. They're trying to go wild success 2.0 and have a very similar thing, but it's bigger, it's more powerful, but it's still less powerful than, say, a fully fledged PS5. So people should be ready for it, and I think your timeline is absolutely what's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if GDC is a moment where they say something because everyone's in town, right?
I joked this morning. Nintendo will announce the Switch, and someone will announce layoffs in the same day because, like you said, it's all right to do it when everyone else is doing it. Let's see if we can sneak it under the radar with that big announcement.
I'm
willing
burying
to put
bad
money
news.
on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a classic media technique, I'm afraid, but yes, GDC seems to me like a strongish time. Doesn't have to be, but it wouldn't surprise me because why wouldn't you talk to the entire development community in the world about it? And then if you do that there, you go towards Summer Games Fest time in June, right? And that gives it, and like you say, you get it September, maybe October if you do need a bit more time, but everyone buys it for Christmas. That's Nintendo's playbook. And Nintendo's playbook it's family, right?
Aim for the parents,
aim for the kids, aim for the families. And what is the thing that even last Christmas, my friends who have kids who are at that age, what are they asking? They're going to me and coming, Switch. What's the best deal here? How does it work? And so Nintendo know that, and that I think once that happens, it changes the year. Because the other thing as well, and I'm sorry, we've not actually talked about the potential games we might be looking forward to this year. The one other thing to think of is actually next year, and it's Grand Theft Auto 6, because unlike Nintendo, Rockstar will be doing the long burn towards it because this has to be a $1 billion game. Like, there's no, and it will be, but it has to be. So they have to build the hype. They have to build the momentum. They have to do everything humanly possible to strike that balance between we're not going to say so much that you're going to feel like everything's been spoiled, but we're going to make this such an event that 2025 will be dominated by that game, probably 2026 as well. So I think those two things are going to be big themes this year. But then, sort of in terms of releases, what are you actually looking forward to out of the releases this year?
There's already been a couple of interesting stuff that's dropped. So Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown came out about a week or so ago. I've heard nothing but good things about this game. I really want to try it out. Also, was it today? We've had Tekken 8 and Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth has dropped, which is I'm looking forward to playing Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth, but that's also like Yakuza 10 or something, and I just finished Yakuza 0. So I look forward to playing that in about 3-4 years.
20 years. Yep.
Yeah. It took me 55 hours just to beat Yakuza 0. But we've also had Pal World. Oh God, let's not even talk about Pal World. That's too much for one day. February we have the Persona 3 remake, which I've never played any of the Persona games. I'm only now going to sit and play Persona 5. Actually, it comes out the same day as Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, which is of course Rocksteady's big gamble post the Batman Arkham. I am interested in this, and I'll give a wee bit. I've seen the GDC talk. So we actually have a team from Rocksteady coming to give a talk about the AI that they're doing in it. And I thought just listening to that made me interested. And I've seen a rough cut of the presentation, and it's a really good talk. I need to give them feedback. Sorry, Gio, everybody over at Rocksteady. I'll get back to you on Monday, I promise. But I was really interested in that, and I really enjoyed that presentation. And that's actually got me excited for that game, because I generally, despite being a comic nerd, as we can tell in many regards, I don't really care about the Suicide Squad. I've never really had an interest in the Suicide Squad.
No.
I didn't enjoy the movies really that much either, but I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. What else? Helldivers 2 comes out in like 2 weeks. That looks amazing. I'm so excited for that. I didn't even play the first one, but it looks like, as someone who's a huge Earth Defense Force fan, it's like, oh, this looks like someone's trying to do EDF in their own way. And I'm on board. What else is coming out? Mario and Donkey Kong, we talked about that. Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones has actually got a release date. This only happened in the last day or so.
Skull and Bones, sort of. What is the release date now for it?
16th of February. It comes out in less than a month. Is that right? Did they change it? That's what Eurogamer's saying.
I mean, that's the thing, is that I'll need a fact check on that, because I'm
fact checking it right now.
Any kind of very late release date announcement for something that's been rumbling on as long as that makes me immediately go, interesting. While you're doing that,
so they have confirmed there will be an open beta from the 8th to the 12th of February. But I don't know if that is still the actual launch date or not. If anyone's in the chat, they might be able to know for sure. But yeah,
exactly. If someone in chat can give Tommy the intel, that'd be great. Because so there's a sequel that is not technically on the list yet, but I think people reasonably expect it to come out this year, or at least I'd cross my fingers and hope. Hollow Knight Silk Song. That is.
Oh yes,
that's the one that I'll be honest. Out of everything that I hope happens in 2024, I hope this finally gets a release date. And I know, because obviously when it was first revealed, it was kind of going to be a Game Pass day one thing. So, there is something around that. But again, I wouldn't be at all surprised if I loved Hollow Knight on Switch, particularly. It was like a perfect, classic Switch is a great indie device.
It's on my Switch and I've not got a chance to play it yet. I'm going to put it on my 2024 playlist. That's definitely something I'll do this year.
I mean, for my money, Hollow Knight is my favorite Metroidvania of all time by quite a distance. Probably one of my top games of all time. It's just wonderful. A game that I am interested in, because I kind of don't know very much about it, and I'm interested to see what they do with it, which is Star Wars Outlaws. So, the
Ubisoft massive entertainment, isn't it? Yeah.
And, it's kind of Ubisoft open world Star Wars. And there's part of me that worries, it's going to be a kind of classic Ubisoft open world game, and you've got to be realistically worried about that. But then, the other part of it seems to be, what I've seen so far is that it is sort of moving away from just being like, and you're a Jedi again, hooray. But maybe I'm wrong on that. Again, I've sort of vaguely just seen the assets and imagery and been like, does this just look a bit more interesting? Maybe it will be, maybe it won't be, but I'm interested in that. I think something else that I'm keeping an eye out for, and something I'll be watching, and it sounds like an odd thing to say because it's an annual release, and well, maybe it's not an odd thing to say given how much I like football, but Football Manager. But the thing that's odd this year, or the thing that's worth watching, is they are reportedly, or they've in fact said publicly, they're changing engine. So this is apparently a full-blown engine change. And having been aware of how... So I know that historically, and I don't know whether this is still true, but this was definitely true of even like 3 or 4 years ago, scouting data was inserted into the game through Microsoft Access. So, yeah, because this is based on a video game series that was first created in... I mean, if you're talking about all the way back to the Jumpman days, because it's still based on that engine all the way far back, you're talking about 90s, 2000s for when Football Manager first became its own standalone thing. So I think they have a lot of legacy stuff, which that has finally reached breaking point, or the point where it can't take the series any further. But, you change engine, right? It's a big thing, and it can have a big impact.
Yep.
So I'm kind of fascinated to see what happens there.
Let's see, over in the chat, Happy Pie says they're looking forward to Arc Riders, which is the other game that Embark Studios are working on alongside the finals. Nice. Of course, I was going to say a couple of big ones that are coming out in the next few weeks. Final Fantasy VII Part 2, it's a Rebirth, I believe it's called. That comes out
Yes,
the
of course.
29th of February because they wanted to be funny about it. Which I think...
Take your chance.
So I have a confession that I have never played Final Fantasy VII. So I joke about this with friends because I played Final Fantasy IV, went meh, and came back for 15. I have not played any Final Fantasy in between, and even then I've only played the first few hours of 15, and I really enjoyed 15. Actually, this year I'm going to play Final Fantasy 15, but I'm interested in trying 7 Remake just because I don't have... It's funny being somebody who is that age who does not have the emotional attachment to that IP when so many people do, because I was of the age when it came out, and I looked at it and went, who gives a because also I wasn't a PlayStation kid. You know, you could only afford one console. I was a Nintendo kid, and then I had a Dreamcast, and then gaming peaked, and somehow I'm still here.
Precisely. Same story here. Final Fantasy, no. Metal Gear Solid, not really. I know Metal Gear Solid through the GameCube. That's actually my jumping in point in terms of Metal Gear Solid.
Did you play Twin Snakes? The remake?
So this is the thing. So what was it?
It's the remake of 2, or 1 and 2 in like on the GameCube or whatever. So
there was the first one got remade on GameCube because I can remember having to like literally unplug the GameCube controller as part of the classic moment. I don't think I played the second one there, but one of the things I know has been available has been the Metal Gear. There's been the trilogy that released.
Yeah, they just did the re-release
last year, and I am kind of tempted to go and play it, but. I have a similar thing with Final Fantasy. And
I will say, yes, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes on the GameCube, it's just the remake of the first one, but it's done to better align it to the second one. It plays like the second one does.
That's right.
There we go. I was like, I've played, because that was good. I remember that. So I've played Metal Gear Solid 1, 2. I got halfway through 3, thought it was meh, and I turned it off. I've never played 4, 5, Revengeance or whatever. So I need to... That's a cardinal sin. I know a whole bunch of people are going to complain I haven't played MGS5, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, 5 is more worth it because it just ends up being a very silly emergent open world game. Actually, at its core, like, you know, you just end up doing really stupid stuff and it's fun. But on the Final Fantasy point, the Final Fantasy game that I played, Crystal Chronicles on GameCube, terrible mistake, bad game. Bad entry in the series, never been able to go back. Sorry, Final Fantasy fans, not happened for me.
Oh, so Dragon's Dogma 2 is out on the 22nd of March, which Dragon's Dogma is one of those, I'm going to get around to playing that. I've heard so many good things about it, so I'm kind of happy to... It's good to see that what was once considered quite a niche cult game has got a sequel. The Alone in the Dark, they've rebooted Alone in the Dark.
Yeah, and it's got Jodie Comer in it. It's sort of a weird...
And like Hopper from Stranger Things, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is this?
It's an odd one, right? And I think I'm sort of... I mean, as well, if people are seeing me check my phone, it is because I am doing exactly the same thing as Tommy, which is just having a look at releases.
This list from Eurogamer up on the screen.
And just being like, oh my God. And I was just checking to see whether I was correct, and I do believe I am, that it is Jodie Comer.
It is, yeah.
Which, hey... You know, like that's a thing. I mean, I will say that, you know, I mentioned it earlier, Paper Mario, Thousand Year Door. Like, I'm quite looking forward to that re-releasing. That'll be a nice little thing to enjoy on the Switch before it probably goes. But yeah, I mean, like one of the big things is like, there's just so many sort of to be confirmed games that probably don't land this year. You know,
looking at the Eurogamer list, once you hit about May, it dries up quite drastically. In fact, the last game they list in May, which I am excited for, is Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 by Ninja Theory, which I thoroughly enjoyed that first game. I thought it was fantastic. Like, considering it was also a budget game as well, that they did just for the giggles. I'm like, I'm really looking forward to seeing what that's like. The only other games that I've actually got dates of note, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl in 5th of September, and Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 on the 9th of September. But
it's not much. It's slim pickings.
Right now, like all these other games right now, it's to be confirmed 2024. Star Wars Outlaws, Avowed. What else we got here? Avowed, and then the Beyond Good and Evil 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 14 is coming to Xbox.
Sure, why not? Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that this year, I think I sort of described it as basically like a transition year. Like, it's coming out of the mayhem of sort of the pandemic, out of the mayhem of the kind of the pandemic reset. And I think everyone is basically lining themselves up for the kind of mid to tail end of this console generation, realistically. Because again, the one thing that is useful, thanks Xbox for this, you didn't mean to do it, but leaking all of your plans last year accidentally when you used the FTC's slightly dodgy web portal, they put in there 2028, right? That's where their new console is, which means by the time we hit October of this year, we're halfway we are at the midpoint essentially. And so that's going to be the thing, is there's going to be a lot of move towards those late era releases, mid to late era releases of this generation. But it also means loads of developers are going to start going, well, hang on a minute, how long do AAA games take to make nowadays?
Yeah,
going to be doing 4 years of work. Better start crewing up.
What, there was the Insomniac leak not that long ago where it had like full timeline of releases dating back to Spider-Man all the way up to like beyond their current. I'm not going to say names or anything because I don't think that's, but they're talking about games up to about 2031, 2032, I think. Yeah. So they know this is probably going to be a title on the PS6 at this point. Yeah. And so, there's probably a lot of games that are in pre-production right now that it's like, yep, this is going to be a next gen title. So we're in that kind of interesting space and allowing them to breathe a little bit. And at the same time, we've also got Switch games. Like, funnily enough, you were talking about the Switch. Like, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD is coming out. That's the big summer game that currently Nintendo have got lined up. Don't get me wrong, Luigi's Mansion 2, great game. Really enjoyed Luigi's Mansion 2. It's not a system seller.
No.
So clearly they're sitting on something. And
you just look at the number of games and you just go remake, rejig, reboot, and it's like you're keeping stuff in the engine so that things keep ticking over, and then that you're going to just basically sort of unveil what the actual thing is later in the year. My crossed fingers hope is new 3D Mario game.
Well, was it the 3D Mario team? Wasn't it the rumor they were working on a Donkey Kong game or something for a long time? But I've also heard about a 3D Mario game is in the works. That's the other rumor I've heard bouncing around.
Absolutely.
If they do, so actually the thing I'll be interested in, does Nintendo announce another Metroid Prime remaster, an upcoming Direct? Because they've already done the first one. I feel like they're going to announce Metroid Prime 2 and 3 remaster. Because if they do that, that's them setting the runway up for Metroid Prime 4. Because we know they're working on it. And like you said, you think it's a launch title.
Yeah, and it would make a lot of sense. I mean, again, because they've announced Metroid Prime 4, they went weirdly quiet on it. And I think it's, like you say, I mean, look at the way they announced the Switch. Look at the slate of titles they had to announce for it. They had a really solid 14 or so games, and they weren't all system sellers, but there was that mix of here's a big brand new Zelda game that reimagines the series, but also here's a load of stuff that adds depth to the bench. And I think you're going to see those kinds of things, but Metroid Prime 4 to me feels like the obvious kind of one of the system sellery kind of games. So anything you can do to get people thinking Metroid Prime, I want to play the next in the series. Well, if you've played Metroid Prime Remastered, you probably then want to play 2 and 3. And then if you play 2 and 3 in time for 4, works quite nicely.
So I have Metroid Prime Remastered over there. Bought it in a sale recently. I haven't played it yet. Too many games I haven't played yet. But I'm looking forward to, because I played Metroid Prime on the GameCube. I then bought the Wii trilogy pack they did.
Yeah.
Which was, because also Metroid Prime 3 I loved. Metroid Prime 2, not as big a fan of, but it's like, okay, I really want to try it out. Just double checking in the chat. Happy Pie says Hades 2 hopefully will be interesting, which I think that is that, can't remember, is that going into early access again like they did the first one? or is it like an actual full-fledged launch?
I don't know, but I'm interested to see where it goes. Definitely.
It's Hades 2 will be in early access, and then also who else was in the chat? Let's see. So I'm waiting for Angerfoot since last year, which need to find out what that was. And then, all right, that looks quite fun. Oh, it's Devolver, first-person shooter video game. Looks like you do a lot of angry kicking and shooting people.
It sounds like a Devolver game. Like as soon as you said it was Devolver, I was like, obviously.
Yeah. Liam says Falling Frontier, which looks like a pretty awesome space RTS. And
nice.
Handsome Jack says still holding out for a sequel to A Way Out. You can't get a sequel to A Way Out, Jack, because I killed you in A Way Out. You're dead. You don't get to come back. That's it.
No, you're done.
Have you played A Way Out?
No.
Oh, no,
I'm afraid not.
It's
I've not played it, but similar things about loads of people being like, this is very good, and also it's very final in terms of how it ends.
Yeah, like so it's the first hour or two is basically Prison Break, and it's that's quite fun, and then it just becomes it then becomes Army of Two as you're like two fugitives on the run from the cops for the rest of the game, and then it kind of builds up this whole thing of it builds tension between the two characters, and then at the end, one of you has to kill the other one, and there's no way around it. And Jack, I did kill you. I didn't actually mean to kill you. I just tried to get you to like stop attacking me, and my solution to get you to stop attacking me was to kill you, which had the desired effect of stopping you from attacking me. But
yeah, exactly. But somewhat final, and makes you feel like returning to it is a little difficult. But it's just like it's that classic thing of I don't know. I was just immediately thinking about True Detective. True Detective, always it's the same brand, always something a bit different though. So it's just like you can treat it like that. Like it's just like play it in a different way. Like
Happy Pie says Angerfoot looks like a Hotline Miami FPS where your foot does the shooting. I need to watch this trailer like as soon as we're off this call, because I didn't even know this game existed, but it's like, this looks really good. Can I also just say, just on a slightly positive moment, I have had VGC's news page up the whole time we've been here, waiting for another video game layoff story, and so I'm really grateful that the video games industry decided to take a breather and not let anyone go in the roughly 90 minutes we've been on the air. Which
exactly.
You. Can we just keep that up, please?
Yeah, and I think, we'll probably have to jump off soon on the basis that we're coming up to 6 o'clock, which means that it's coming up to another point where embargoed press releases about layoffs might start suddenly getting released into the press. So, it's like, we've got to jump before it gets too desperate again, Tommy.
Indeed. On that note, we should start actually looking to wrap up. Thank you all to everyone who's tuned in to us live. This is the first time we've done it. We've still got a few production
exactly
things.
Production issues. We've
got a few production issues to figure out. We need to get what we need to do is we need to get George a bigger microphone. Clearly, I think that's what it is. If you just look at the size of it, I don't think it's big enough for him. So we'll fix that up. The audio version of the podcast will be live shortly. I don't know why I'm saying this, because if you have already listened to us all the way to the end, you don't want to listen to it again. And if you're listening to us on the audio for the first time, I hope the audio was better than it was live. And we'll be back. What we're trying to do, here's the goal, is we want to try and record the podcast a little bit more frequently. We already have... I say I'll tell you offline, George, because I sorted all this out without you. We have about 4 guests already lined up for the show in the next few weeks, which is really, in the next couple of months rather, which is really exciting. So we're going to try and get into a bit more of a regular cadence of doing this. And, but yeah, with that, thank you all very much. I hope you've all had a great time. And anything else you want to say, George, before we log off?
No, except for subscribe to my newsletter, please. Video Games Industry Memo at Substack. Thank you very much. And also, I will try and make sure that my mic works better, because this is the first time this has ever happened to me, and I'm very confused.
I've never accused you of being quiet.
No, it's literally the opposite of what people say about me.
It's the one thing that nobody's ever said about either of us.
No.
So, there you go.
Challenging times.
But yes, thank you very much, everyone. Please subscribe to the Video Games Industry Memo on Substack. Subscribe to AI and Games on Substack while you're at it. And have a good one. Everybody, have a great Friday night or afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world, or if it's Saturday where you are, have a good time. But yeah, stay safe, take care, and we'll catch you all again very soon. Gotta play the intro music. Here we go. The Branching Factor podcast is hosted and produced by me, Tommy Thompson, with support from Anne Sullivan, George Osborne, Mike Cook, and Kwang Yun. Our theme music is provided courtesy of Ben Ridge. The logo and thumbnail art is thanks to Helen Odell. Special thanks to Shraddha Gupta and Phoebe Trigg for additional production support. And of course, to all of you out there listening. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Branching Factor. Wherever you are in the world, be sure to stay safe, have fun, and we will be back.